Longest partial government shutdown, starting a fourth week with no major deal to fund parts of the government.
I'm ready, willing, and able to get a deal done. They think it's politics. I think it's bad politics. I'd rather see the Democrats come back from their vacation and act.
He's made offer after offer. The only people in these meetings that have not made a counteroffer are the Democrats.
There is a crisis today. It's a crisis of leadership. Donald Trump has failed to uphold the values of our great nation.
Julian Castro formally announces his run for the White House, is the first candidate to officially join what is expected to be a crowded field of Democrats.
The Washington Post reporting that you went to unusual lengths to keep your conversations with President Putin under wraps.
I'm not keeping anything under wraps. I couldn't care less.
A major winter storm threatening millions with heavy snow.
We were
Absolutely. And
Look who's here.
thank you. Here this morning and listening to Punch Over. We had that yesterday. And
Fantastic.
we're back.
We're back.
Me and Griff together again.
And Pete's back from the border. I was on the border.
You did a great
Let
job
me tell you
down
something.
there.
Let me tell you something. No. The border loves Griff Jenkins.
That's true.
Everyone I saw was like, do you know Griff? Griff's my favorite. I love Griff. Griff is down here with us. They love you because you brought a lot of attention to an issue that for a long time, a lot of people weren't paying attention
You're
to.
kind. It's not me. It's just simply Americans want to know what's happening so desperately, and they don't want it through the prism of political bias on both sides.
That's it.
One could argue, but they want the reality of what's happening. We have spent a lot of time in 2018 showing them. We're going to continue to show them when this caravan starts coming. There's another one coming.
Do you have
There's
your
another one.
tickets booked yet, Griff?
We're working on that. But
Stay tuned
the
for more
point
Griff
is
Jenkins.
the government is shut down now in day 23.
Yep.
A lot of Americans are suffering because they didn't get a paycheck. The president is holding his ground while he is calling on Congress to get something done.
I will say this, talking to a lot of folks down there who are not getting a paycheck, they're okay with it. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of people feeling the heat, no doubt. But they support the president standing firm on this because, no one solved it in a long time.
That happened to me. I went through TSA and I felt terrible. And I told them, thank you for what you're doing. It was the first day that I knew they weren't going to get a paycheck. And, they said, but we really want a wall. So, I mean, it is what it is.
No, you're right. Well, President Trump last night was on Judge Jeanine's show, called in to talk about the funding battle that is ongoing. What will Democrats do? Listen to the president.
Frankly, I'm ready, willing, and able to get a deal done, but they think it's politics. I think it's bad politics. This country wants to have protection at the border. I want to give them a chance to see if they can act responsibly.
Okay.
I'd rather see the Democrats come back from their vacation and act. It's only politics. That's the game they're playing. I actually think it's bad politics for them. But if they don't come to their senses, you know what I'll do? I'll do a national emergency. We're all set. It's 100%, and I'll have to do that.
Rachel, you've said before, shutdowns end when one side realizes they're losing.
That's right.
Right now, I think both sides are pretty dug in.
They're pretty dug in, but I think that the president looks like he's the one that's negotiating. He's the one that's trying to move this forward. They seem to me, like the Democrats, like they're the ones that don't want anything to happen. And there's a lot on the table that they could like. There's DACA, something they've been saying forever, that they want to be the defenders of those who came here through no fault of their own. Now they have an opportunity and they're not taking it.
No, they're not. In fact, there are a group of 30 or so Democrats in Puerto Rico now on a sort of tour of the post-Hurricane Maria stuff. There's a lot of lobbyists down there. President calling on them to come back to the table. Of course, if the president were to declare a national emergency, it would pull funds from that was set aside for Puerto Rico, among other places, in the wake of hurricane
From the
damage.
emergency relief fund,
and so
which is another reason to make the deal,
it's
right?
further politicized, but here's the point. The longer this goes on, the more this develops. When Democrats are in Puerto Rico, the president's of the White House calling for their resolution, administration, the poll numbers grow for the support for the wall.
And we didn't know when this began which way those numbers would go. But it wasn't just right now. It was, of course, over Christmas and New Year's. This new poll shows that over time, since January of 2018, support for the wall has actually increased. So in 2018, support for the wall was 34%. Today it's 42%. Opposition was 63%. Now it's 54%. Still not north of 50%, which is the number. That was a Washington Post ABC News poll, by the way. But as the debate continues, people are starting to recognize that it's common. The wall may look political, but when you actually talk to people on the ground, it's basic common sense.
Right. The more that the Border Patrol gets out there, the experts who are on the ground who are actually saying, yeah, we actually need a wall to help slow down the traffic. I think there's something the president could be doing too right now, and that is talking to Spanish media. There is a deal to be made that Hispanics have been wanting for a long time. They're over in Puerto Rico, the Democrats right now. The president's in the White House. Why not take the opportunity? Talk to Spanish media from right there in the White House. Call up the stations in Miami and Texas and Chicago. Tell them I'm the one that's fighting for DACA with a deal that, and by the way, the entire immigration issue, comprehensive immigration reform that Democrats have wanted and a lot of other Americans have wanted, all depends on border security.
So you're exactly right. But so many conservatives have been skeptical of comprehensive reform because it's never included actual border security,
This
closing
might be the
border.
first, but that's always been the impediment. So if you actually get border security, we can start to have a real conversation.
Well, let me walk out on you from a Washington standpoint for a second. Look at the numbers. Look at the number of Republicans that are standing firm. This also in the poll, 87% among Republicans supporting the wall. You know, that's approaching 90%. That is a very strong front. And if you go back just and look quickly at that increase in the current poll, you have basically a +8 gain of support of all voters for it, but then a -9 drop. So the movement, the tide is all moving towards the support for a wall, and that is fundamentally, undeniably a problem for the Democrat position that would suggest eventually President Trump will win the battle over this because the hearts and minds of the American people across the board are moving towards support.
It's taken time to educate. You spent a lot of time on the border. I was there just a couple of days ago. When you see it and you understand it and you talk to the people, you start to say, there's no reason to be opposed to this unless you want the borders to be open, which is ultimately the Democrat position. So the longer this goes on, I think the Democrats' hand gets weaker and weaker.
Well, somebody who wasn't afraid to say he was against a wall and basically for open borders was Julian Castro, who yesterday announced his bid for the White House. Take a listen.
We say no to building a wall and yes to building community. We say no to scapegoating immigrants and yes to dreamers. Yes to keeping families together. There is a crisis today. It's a crisis of leadership. Donald Trump has failed to uphold the values of our great nation.
Griff, tell me more.
Julian Castro, 44 years old, was the youngest mayor, I believe, elected to the 7th largest city in America. He gave the 2012 keynote speech at the DNC. He was President Obama's HUD secretary. This is a rising star in the Democrat Party, undeniably, obviously wanting to get out in front. Some will suggest he's going to start making himself very attractive for a front runner for perhaps the second part of the ticket. But he clearly has support, but he's from Texas. And there's another guy by the name of Robert Francis that has a much stronger name recognition. We'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, I don't think Julian Castro would be announcing this early if it wasn't for the really unexpected success of Beto or Robert
Francis. Well, if you lose, you win, according to...
Well, in fact, he supported Beto when Beto and campaigned for him in the early part of his Senate run, of Beto's Senate run. And I don't think anyone expected Beto to catch fire the way he has, but Robert Francis has.
He has.
And so Julian Castro is putting it out there going, wait, don't forget about me.
Yeah, a lot of folks on the left saying, wait, don't forget about me, including Joe Biden, everyone's favorite uncle. The New York Post headline is Joe Biden expected to announce 2020 presidential run. Axios says Joe Biden is running most days. So, reports can be wrong, But it all seems to be that Joe Biden will throw his hat in the ring.
He's been telling, Axios has a piece that he's been privately telling people if he's walking, he's running.
Oh, I see.
And there is also anticipation by some speculating that Biden is actually going to make an official announcement on Tuesday, the 15th.
On Tuesday.
Well, here's what President Trump has to say about Biden running.
He was always a 1%er. He was a 1% guy. He ran 2 or 3 times. He never got above 1%. And then Obama came along and took him off the trash heap. Then he became a vice president, and now he's probably leading. But he's basically a 1% guy. He's weak.
Like only President Trump
Took him off the trash heap.
Off the trap heap. A 1% guy. Well, he's got more than 1% right now. Initial polls have him in the mid-teens, along with Bernie Sanders.
Is he at the highest in the poll?
No, Bernie Sanders 18% amongst Democrats, Biden 17, Michelle Obama not currently declared at 16, Robert Francis at 11, and Pocahontas at 4. So, you know, we shall see how it sorts itself out. But
all right.
It's early.
Okay, well, we're going to go to some headlines first. We start with a Fox News alert. A state trooper and Army veteran is killed when he is stopped on his way home to help with a crash.
We lost one of our own. One of our best. Everybody loved him.
Illinois trooper Chris Lambert was outside of his cruiser when a Jeep hit him. Police say bad weather played a role and the driver involved is cooperating. The 5-year veteran of the force leaves behind a wife and a 1-year-old daughter. How sad. Extreme weather is blamed for 7 deaths in Missouri and Kansas. The massive winter storm dumping up to 17 inches in parts of the Midwest. The storm now heading east, impacting 65 million people. Snow is already falling in Washington as we look live at the White House. Up to a foot of snow is expected there. Any moment, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will speak in Qatar. These are live pictures from the event. Secretary Pompeo also revealing he will meet with the Saudi Crown Prince during his 9-country tour through the Middle East. He is expected to travel to Saudi Arabia later today. The meeting comes amid controversy over the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
All right, Rachel, I'll take it here. To the NFL playoffs, the Rams defense helps stuff the Cowboys. LA grabs their first playoff win in 14 years, beating Dallas 30-22. We are all grateful that Dallas is finally out. And the Chiefs will play in their first AFC title game in 25 years, defeating the Colts 31-13 today. Patriots and Chargers face off. The winner will play the Chiefs, and you can watch the Eagles and Saints game on Fox at 4:40 Eastern. The winner of that game is going to play the Rams. America is collectively cheering against the Philadelphia Eagles.
That's right.
I think that's a fact. That's an objective. They're done. They've had their time in the sun. See ya.
Yeah,
Go Saints.
You blasted the Cowboys being out. Now you're rooting against the Eagles. We're going to get some hate mail. Email us at friends@foxnews.com.
No one watching cares about the NFC East at all.
Listen, I was at the bar at the hotel last night and sitting next to a Dallas Cowboys fan. He's all excited about it. Obviously not so
He's
happy
not watching
this morning.
Fox and Friends
But
right
you know
now.
what he's in town for? The retail convention, the biggest in the nation. He says the economy's doing great, but I digress. Here's something you may have not heard about. The economy is booming. Oh, I just mentioned it. A closer look at the big news getting lost during the government shutdown.
And there's a crisis at one middle school over this $350 beanie. How this pricey fashion piece is causing problems.
I'll take 2.
Coming up.
Getting buried in the media headlines about the partial government shutdown is the fact that U.S. workers are actually winning. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the rate of labor force participation for prime age adults ages 25 to 54 rose in the fourth quarter of 2018, more than in any other quarter since 1994. Joining us now to discuss the booming economy is Romina Baccia, the director of the Grover M. Herman Center for the Federal Budget. Romina, good morning. It looks like some good news is getting overlooked.
Good morning. Indeed, very good news are getting overlooked. And this partial government shutdown is really small. You're looking at $325 billion out of a more than $4 trillion budget, so maybe 7-8% of federal funding. So the economy is continuing to roar thanks to the president's deregulatory agenda, which he's continuing to push, and also these sweeping tax cuts, which were very significant. The largest tax cut, the biggest tax reform in 30 years, and businesses are loving it. Small business confidence is way up, and that's why we're seeing so much hiring and so much growth in the economy.
Yeah, you mentioned hiring, Romina. Let's just look here at the December jobs report. 312,000 jobs added, 3.2% wage growth, 3.9% unemployment growth. How does that get lost in the media?
Well, unfortunately, bad news seems to sell better, but these are really good news all around. This was an amazing jobs report, and I think that we're going to continue to see strength in this economy, especially if the president continues his push to further deregulate, because that is what allows businesses to grow and hire workers. But for long-run growth, we also need to think about how can we boost innovation and further productivity enhancements, and some of the dark clouds on the horizon are the rising deficit and debt. But don't despair. Those are all problems we can fix. The good news right now is that minorities in particular are benefiting greatly from this economy, which is really awesome. Women, Hispanics, black men and women both are returning to the labor force in droves, and labor force participation is also starting to inch up, which is really good news.
Romina, let me get you to put in context, if you will, as we hear so much about the workers, because of the shutdown, are going without a paycheck, that we feel for them, and no one wants anyone to suffer like that. But when you put that in comparison to the growth that we saw in that December jobs report in the economy, give us some sense of really how we should process this.
Yeah. If you're looking at how many federal workers are affected, it's about 800,000 of them. About half of those are eligible for unemployment benefits. And in the Washington, D.C. region, where I'm located, about 8,000 federal workers have filed for those benefits. Now, when those federal employees receive their back pay, which they have historically received, and which both the president and Republicans and Democrats in Congress seem to want to provide for them, they've already passed bills to do so. They will have to return those unemployment benefits. So I feel bad for workers that are working paycheck to paycheck, that are suffering during this government shutdown. But I think it's important to look at also what aspects of the economy are affected by the shutdown.
Absolutely.
And maybe,
Romina, we got to leave it there, but thank you for bringing that good news to us.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Coming up, breaking this morning, big changes coming at the VA. How after years of trouble, a health care fix for our heroes may be on the way. And this Democratic congressman wants to put aside an effort to investigate terrorism to investigate President Trump. Surprise. A former FBI counterterror agent who led the manhunt for the Unabomber is here to respond. We're back with some headlines for you now. Violence gripping Paris for the 9th straight weekend. Police unleashing tear gas near the iconic Arc de Triomphe after people threw rocks at them. Tens of thousands once again protesting the high cost of living in France. And Illinois is refusing to permit a concert hosted by R. Kelly. Officials tell the Chicago Tribune they turned down the request for security reasons after protesters gathered outside his Chicago studio. The disgraced singer is facing a backlash following a Lifetime docuseries detailing several sex abuse allegations against him. He has denied the accusations. Pete, Rachel?
Thanks, Griff. All right, well, are Democrats turning their attention away from taking on Islamic terrorism? Reports out this morning, Democratic Congressman and Foreign Affairs Committee Chair Eliot Engel plans to shut down a counterterror subcommittee and instead replace it with a panel to investigate Trump.
Engel telling the New Yorker, we, quote, just thought if you're going to do something relevant in this era where Congress is going to reassert itself, where there are so many questionable activities of this administration vis-a-vis foreign policy, that it made sense to have this.
Terry Turchie is the former deputy director of the FBI's counterterrorism division and led the Unabomber investigation. He joins us now to react. Terry, Your reaction, so you've got a subcommittee, he has the reins of power. One of his first moves is to get rid of something that was meant to look into where the roots of Islamic radical terrorism comes from and replace it with something to investigate Trump.
Sure, Pete. Well, it tells you a lot of things, really, this one decision. The first thing it tells us is the hard left has a great influence today in the Democratic Party. That's a national security problem in itself. It's also telling us that the resistance is very much alive and well. And finally, that we've come a long way where the Democratic Party has really changed. You know, this committee and all of our work in terrorism has always been treated as a very bipartisan issue. Of course, it's a major issue. Probably terrorism continues to be the gravest threat posed to America today. And it has a history, and it goes back many years. But just a couple years before 9/11, back in 1999, there was a bipartisan commission. It involved former Senator Gary Hart, former House Speaker at the time, Newt Gingrich, and it was called the American Security in the 21st Century Bipartisan Commission. And they identified a whole list of threats we would face. Remember, 2 years before 9/11. They identified porous borders. They had identified disintegrating nation states. They even predicted that America would be hit by a massive terror attack that could kill thousands of people. Fast forward to 9/11, the 9/11 Commission. They identified several things: communication between law enforcement agencies on the local, state, and federal level, communication with the FISA wall and the problems with FISA between the FBI, national security part and the criminal law enforcement part, and immigration problems and problems at the border, and how all of the 9/11 thing came together. All of that was done together. And now along comes the Democratic control of the House, and we decided that this committee is no longer necessary to focus on terrorism because Donald Trump is the main threat. This is a really bad decision, and I think it tells you all you need to know, that actions speak louder than words. This is nothing more than political and another attack on and more resistance to the president.
I mean, to be clear, you worked in counterterrorism. You follow this very closely. Has any terror threat been diminished to justify removing this subcommittee or repurposing it for the investigating Donald Trump?
Rachel, back in 2000, 2001, months before 9/11, I briefed congressional committees and talked to them about the decade we'd just been through with both the international domestic terrorism problem we had. And many times when these briefings were done, because we had been in kind of a pause, we'd arrested Theodore Kaczynski, we had a lot of things under control, but we had big problems on the way, and we could tell. But after these briefings, because we needed more money to put more people into counterterrorism, these politicians would say, look, you've laid out some anecdotal stories, but we just don't see the threat. And we're right back to the future. I'm afraid we're right back to where we started, and that's the kind of decisions that are being made today by the people in the House.
I mean, Terry, when you get complacent, that's when you're vulnerable, for sure.
Exactly.
Or distracted.
Or distracted, indeed.
By politics.
Exactly.
Terry Turchi, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Good stuff.
You bet.
Right. It's the most insulting thing I've ever seen. President Trump fires back at the New York Times after its latest story claiming he was investigated for being a Russian agent. Former Congressman Jason Chaffetz says the story just reveals the FBI was going rogue. He's here live next.
And a fireman?
I think it's the most insulting thing I've ever been asked. I think it's the most insulting article I've ever had written. And if you read the article, you'd see that they found absolutely nothing. Well, it's called the Failing New York Times for a reason. I've been tougher on Russia than anybody else, probably any other president, period. But certainly the last 3 or 4 presidents, modern-day presidents, nobody's been as tough as I have from any standpoint.
That was President Trump last night on Judge Jeanine's show, talking about this article in the New York Times, alleging that President Trump was secretly working on behalf of Russia. Let's bring in Jason Chaffetz, Fox News contributor, former U.S. Congressman from Utah, and former chairman of the House and Government Oversight Committee, author of the book, The Deep State. Jason, thanks for being here this morning. So you saw the article, you saw the president's reaction. It almost feels like their only option. At this point, so much has gone on, they have to say, well, we legitimately thought he was a Russian agent, so we had to investigate him. But how absurd was that article?
It's absolutely over the top. It's a desperation. But you know what? The more we look at it and the more we learn, it's Director Comey, the head of the FBI, who was for his own personal political salvation, was working to manipulate the system to try to protect himself. Remember, Rod Rosenstein is the one that authored a memo that gave it to the president recommending the firing of Director Comey. Every Democrat, after the way he treated Hillary Clinton, wanted to fire the director as well. And so he puts into place this motion to try to protect his hide and to try to put in place, through manipulation, a special counsel. He was successful in doing that. But this assertion that the president is anything but 100% pro-America is absolutely ridiculous.
I know it is insulting. I mean, I don't think. I mean, we can kind of laugh. Oh, they're saying that the president was a Russian agent, but that's treason. Yeah. It's really a very serious charge. You know, you mentioned how James Comey was trying to protect himself. It seems like he's also trying to protect his reputation. Here's a tweet that he put out that I think is directed at the Washington social scene. But anyway, it says, "I ask you to judge me by the enemies I have made." What do you make of that as his response to it? It's an FDR quote, by the way, to all of this.
Well, pretty much everybody dislikes Director Comey at this point. So it's pretty much unanimous that he is the most disliked person there at the FBI. And certainly you can't be on the receiving end of a more than 500-page scathing report from the Inspector General about how inept and how much chaos was going on at the highest echelons of the FBI, and then walk away from it and think, wow, this person was really doing a good job. Democrats and Republicans alike have found out who James Comey really is, and he should have been gone a long time ago.
Hey, Jason, let me ask you about another Washington Post headline we caught. Here it is. Trump has concealed details of his face-to-face encounters with Putin from senior officials in administration. A lot of folks starting to get concerned that there was an effort here. What do you make of it?
I think the president makes a very good point in that nobody has been tougher on the Russian government and Vladimir Putin than Donald Trump. I mean, look, actions are louder than words. We want a president to have close communication with the world leaders, even if they are not on, have our best interest on our side. And the president is doing that. But look what he's done, from kicking out diplomats and taking on sanctions and doing the things that President Trump has done. If you look at it objectively, he's been harder on Russia than anybody else.
And again, Jason, the insinuation of this Washington Post piece is that the president is having side conversations with Vladimir Putin, maybe about secret deals and things we don't know, that are anathema or antithetical to American principles, that he's selling us out. I mean, that is what the New York Times is insinuating, what the Washington Post is saying. Now, the president last night on Judge Jeanine's show had a chance to respond to this insinuation, which I've now said 3 times. This is what he had to say.
I don't care. I mean, I had a conversation like every president does. You sit with the president of various countries. I do it with all countries. We had a great conversation, and I'm not keeping anything under wraps. I couldn't care less.
Your response?
Well, it starts with the fact that the Democrats can't get over the fact that Donald Trump became the president of the United States. They never saw it coming. They don't understand it. They don't understand a person would put America first. They don't get it. And so coming into that, they always believed that Donald Trump was an illegitimate president, and how dare he have communications. But look at the success the president has had with Russia, with Iran, with North Korea. The world is a better and safer place because of Donald Trump.
You're right. It all comes back to that. Jason, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Jason.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, well, we're going to turn to some headlines now. New pictures showing kidnapping victim Jamie Claus appears to be doing well. The 13-year-old Wisconsin girl is reunited with family 88 days after she was abducted. This is a new video of the home where the police say she was held captive. Investigators say she escaped and asked a woman walking her dog for help. Jake Patterson is charged with kidnapping Claus and murdering her parents. He's due in court tomorrow. Department of Veterans Affairs is preparing to redirect billions of dollars into private care, according to the New York Times. VA hospitals VA hospitals treat 7 million veterans a year and has struggled to see patients on time. The plan is expected to give veterans shorter wait times and more choices. The VA and Trump administration are still negotiating $50. The kids freak out, and then staff has to waste time tracking them down. The principal is asking students to just keep the hats at home. And those are your headlines.
The parents. If you're a parent of a kid with a $350 hat, you're the problem.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. And by the way, kids lose stuff all the time. So don't give them a $350 hat.
Well, unfortunately, I'm going to need a hat like that, I think,
Rick,
when I get back to D.C.
Your disgust was
It was.
true and real.
350 times 8 if you have 8 kids.
Yeah.
Whoa. Do that math while I'm doing that.
No one's getting that hat in my house.
Gosh. You should spend your time looking for your $328 back. Or
it's true.
Yeah,
$335.
totally.
How about that? All right. Big storm moved across the central part of the country, one of the biggest across parts of Missouri. We had up to 19 inches of snow. Most of that energy moving towards the east. And D.C., as Griff is talking about, is one of the spots that's getting that snow right now. Still under winter storm warnings here. Today will be the day that it mostly winds down. And overall, we'll just have a couple little patches here that are about 3 more inches of rain, maybe a little bit higher as you go back in towards the central Appalachians. But aside from that, here's how this plays out today. Storm pulls off towards the east, still snowing pretty heavily by midday in the D.C. area. And then by around 7 o'clock tonight, it stops. By 10 o'clock tonight, most of this is off the entire eastern seaboard. And this week, guys, we're going to turn our attention to California, where spots are going to get probably 7 to 9 inches of rain and cause some pretty big flooding out there.
They're getting killed out there. I was out there last week, a lot of rain already.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Okay.
Thank you, Rick.
You bet.
Thank you. All right, well, some of the media say a border wall won't stop drugs from coming into the country.
Majority of hard drugs seized by Customs and Border Protection come through ports of entry. A wall would not stop that.
A wall will not block the legal points of entry.
Thank you, Don Lemon. Is that really true? We'll ask the former drug czar coming up next.
Plus, look at that, a big show on tap. Florida Senator Marco Rubio will be here, along with Andrew McCarthy, Tammy Bruce, and David Bossie. Pour a cup of coffee. Sunday's just getting started.
Some quick medical headlines. Police say fentanyl is likely to blame for a mass overdose in California. 1 person died, 12 others are hospitalized, 4 of them in critical condition. It's unclear what the drug fentanyl might have been paired with. A new study suggests pet painkillers could be contributing to the opioid crisis. Researchers say animal prescriptions have increased at an alarming rate. They believe the medication could be getting into the wrong hands. Over 47,000 Americans died of opioid overdoses.
Pet painkillers?
Yeah.
I did not know that was a thing. Thank you, Rachel. All right. The media says a border wall won't stop drugs from coming in to the country.
So the fact is, the majority of hard drugs seized by Customs and Border Protection come through ports of entry. A wall would not stop that.
The president says a wall will stop the drugs, the heroin, the fentanyl, the other opioids. Most of the drugs, his own government says, come in through legal points of entry, where there's commerce, where there's crossing. A wall will not block the legal points of entry.
But the point is that most of it is coming in deep concealment through legal ports of entry.
A wall would do nothing about any of that if that's how it's coming in.
So is that true? Let's ask John Walters, former drug czar under George W. Bush and the COO of the Hudson Institute. John, thanks for being here this morning. So the critique is you can close the border with walls, but the drugs are still going to come in through legal ports of entry. Your response?
Well, it's kind of a stupid analysis if you think about what's really going on. The problem is we have 2,000 miles of border, and we have too many people on guard duty and not enough people screening at the ports of entry. Yes, those are the entries, but we have to guard all this space between. The wall is a fixed barrier that channels the flow into fixed and controlled areas where you can screen and analyze what's happening and stop the drugs. It's kind of silly. It's kind of, I guess it's politically inspired stupidity. But it's ludicrous to say that the wall won't allow us to focus our manpower on the places where we can control and search.
Thank you for saying that. It's stupid analysis. You're exact. Sometimes as stupid is as stupid does. So if you didn't have to allocate the resources to the portions of the border that are wide open right now, what more things could you do at these ports of entry to prevent drugs from coming in?
Well, first you want to kind of have more people to do analysis of what kinds of methods are being used, about the networks, the communication of networks.
So
to try to find
intelligence,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, and then you want to screen. You need to do more intense screening, and you need to be able to kind of pull things into secondary. You need to have link in the screening area. We have laws that allow us to go back into the country and stop trucks and so forth even after the port of entry, but you want to stop these at the port of entry. I mean, the other big stupid lie here is that there isn't a crisis. I mean, since the beginning of the Obama administration alone, hundreds of thousands of people have died of overdoses. This is a historic carnage, 70,000 in 2017, more than all the deaths in the Vietnam War. For people to, I mean, people wonder why some Americans are angry. When political leaders say this is a manufactured crisis, that is infuriating to families and communities that are being destroyed. It's like, what? You don't get it? You live in Washington and you live in La La Land? I mean, this is really a challenge to the political leadership of the country to face the challenge at the border that is murdering people in large numbers through these poisons.
Are Democrats choosing to ignore this crisis, or do they think it's politically expedient to do so?
I think the politics over this have now eclipsed the responsibilities of elected leaders. And I also think that there has been a failure to come to grips with this. The Obama administration started this. He didn't want to focus on the border. He didn't want to focus on drug enforcement. And we have the largest loss of life from drug overdoses. And that doesn't even cover the people who are being addicted in the tens of thousands.
Sure.
And he let this get out of control. Then he's legalizing marijuana. We have a new book out by Alex Berenson talking about the link between crime and addiction and violence and serious mental illness. All this stuff was swept under the rug for over 8 years, and now the consequences are coming back to destroy huge communities in America.
Yeah, it's no good. John Walters, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you, Peter.
All right. Well, should students be required to take a citizenship test before being allowed to graduate high school? I love that idea. One state's trying to make it the law. But would students actually pass the test? Rachel hit the streets of New York to ask college students.
Who vetoes bills? Congress? No, the president?
The president. The president. Oh, boy. So could they answer the rest? The troubling results coming next hour. Look out for Rachel on the street. And get your motor running. We're live at the North American International Auto Show in Detroit. A preview of the coolest cars. Cool dude on display coming up next.
The longest partial government shutdown, starting a fourth week with no major deal to fund parts of the government.
I'm ready, willing, and able to get a deal done. They think it's politics. I think it's bad politics. I'd rather see the Democrats come back from their vacation and act.
He's made offer after offer. The only people in these meetings that have not made a counteroffer are the Democrats.
There is a crisis today. It's a crisis of leadership. Donald Trump has failed to uphold the values of our great nation.
Julian Castro formally announces his run for the White House, is the first candidate to officially join what is expected to be a crowded field of Democrats.
The Washington Post reporting that you went to unusual lengths to keep your conversations with President Putin under wraps.
I'm not keeping anything under wraps. I couldn't care less.
A major winter storm threatening millions with heavy snow.
We were.
Absolutely. And
Look who's here.
thank you. Here this morning and listening to Bunch Over. We had that yesterday. And
Fantastic.
we're back.
We're back.
Me and Griff together again.
And Pete's back from the border.
I was on the border.
You did a great
Let
job
me tell you
down
something.
there.
Let me tell you something. No. The border loves Griff Jenkins.
That's true.
Everyone I saw was like, do you know Griff? Griff's my favorite. I love Griff. Griff is down here with us. They love you because you brought a lot of attention to an issue that for a long time, a lot of people weren't paying attention
You're
to.
kind. It's not me. It's just simply Americans want to know what's happening so desperately, and they don't want it through the prism of political bias on both sides.
That's it.
One could argue, but they want the reality of what's happening. We have spent a lot of time in 2018 showing them. We're going to continue to show them when this care caravan starts coming. There's another one
Yeah,
coming.
do you have your
another one.
tickets booked yet, Griff?
We're working on that. But
stay tuned for more Griff Jenkins.
The government is shut down now in day 23.
Yep.
A lot of Americans are suffering because they didn't get a paycheck. The president is holding his ground while he is calling on Congress to get something done.
I will say this, talking to a lot of folks down there who are not getting a paycheck, they're okay with it. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of people feeling the heat, no doubt. But they support the president standing firm on this because, you know, no one solved it in a long time.
That happened to me. I went through TSA and I felt terrible, and I told them, you know, thank you for what you're doing. It was the first day that I knew they weren't going to get a paycheck. And, you know, they said, but we really want a wall. So, I mean, it is what it is.
No, you're right. Well, President Trump last night was on Judge Jeanine's show, called in to talk about the funding battle that is ongoing. What will Democrats do? Listen to the president.
Frankly, I'm ready, willing, and able to get a deal done, but they think it's politics. I think it's bad politics. This country wants to have protection at the border. I want to give them a chance to see if they can act responsibly.
Okay.
I'd rather see the Democrats come back from their vacation and act. It's only politics. That's the game they're playing. I actually think it's bad politics for them. But if they don't come to their senses, you know what I'll do? I'll do a national emergency. We're all set. It's 100%, and I'll have to do that.
You know, Rachel, you've said before, shutdowns end when one side realizes they're losing.
That's right.
Right now, I think both sides are pretty dug in.
They're pretty dug in, but I think that the president looks like he's the one that's negotiating. He's the one that's trying to move this forward. They seem to me like the Democrats